let's take a look at some code. So this is a project. You don't have to worry if you don't really know this. I just needed something for us to kind of look at. It's a Rick and Morty quiz app that I made for fun. So up here, you see this is basically parts of the boilerplate. Doc type HTML. So that's telling the browser that this is an HTML document. Whenever the browser, which is a user, is making a request from the server, like we talked about in the internet section, the computer ways away that's sending all those packages, it's actually looking for the HTML. It wants that structure. It needs to know what it's receiving. So we have that listed right there. Right here, this can be part of the boilerplate. It's best practice. It always comes up with my boilerplate, every text editor I've used. We're setting the language, so this can be part of a screen reader, making sure it's using the right language. This can also help with translations on web pages. Whenever you've gone to a website and the browser has, or maybe Google has said, do you want us to translate it? That's how it's kind of figuring out the target language that it's coming from and what it needs to go to. Next we have the head. So what you're probably seeing already is that some of these tags are just one tag. Some of them, like the head, we've got two. One of them is just the tag, one of them is that same tag and it's got a little backslash in front of it. So that's considered opening and closing tags. Now some elements need that, like they surround something. Some elements, like the doc type HTML, BR for a line break, those are all just going to kind of be on their own, and that's okay. They all function differently, so there's no hard and fast rule, but I will say most of the time you're going to have an open and closing tag. And your text editor is going to give you a heads up on that most of the time. Pretty much every modern text editor has something baked in for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, some kind of programming that gives you a heads up if you haven't closed a tag, because it's most likely not going to work out. So right here we see our metadata. So there's a few things. We've got the characters that we're going to be using, UTF-8. There's the width and scale. We've got some, right here we've got the name and description. So this is that bit that's going to show up underneath the title on those Google results. And then the title is going to be that bit that shows up at the top of the screen. Usually see it like this in a tab. Next we've got my CSS is linked up right here. There's no reason for anybody to see any of this stuff on the actual site, on the web page itself. So that's why this is all going in the head. And then we've got some Google fonts. I used a few different fonts. Google Fonts is phenomenal. I love it so much, especially for somebody who's not the superstar at design like me. Next we're getting down to the body. So this is going to be a little bit different than how I'm going to teach you up front, because I really wanted to demonstrate semantic markup. That was kind of the point of this thing. I also love Rick and Morty, but the big idea was having some semantic markup. So right here I have a header listed here. So that header opening and closing, that's actually going to tell a screen reader that that's a different part of the body, that is specifically a header. As opposed to the header, there's main. So main will make up all of the rest, and they can have whatever content in there you want, really. It's more about what you're trying to communicate to somebody who can't visually see the screen. Whether it's a grandparent where their eyesight's going, or somebody who's blind, they might need that assistive technology so that this isn't just a blank screen to them. Here you can see a couple tags. We've got an image tag. That's where we're kind of bringing in content, not just text. Like I said, there's content, there's lists. This is all structured as an unordered list as opposed to an ordered list. We'll get into all that later. Further down, the end of the header. Now we're seeing a section. I mentioned div, and you saw div was actually the tag for the element that was on the MDN website, and that is a little unusual. It's probably because div is an older element and it's not completely deprecated. When you hear deprecated, that means not supported anymore. So div still exists out in the wild. If you go to like Starbucks webpage, they're very huggy-feely and try to be very accessible, but their code base is so big that they haven't removed all the divs and turned it into section. And it'll still function. It's not going to totally break it. It just might not work the best under some circumstances, but I'm also guessing, knowing that company, they probably work really hard on how they structure the use of divs so that it still gets the same general output for somebody who's visually impaired. Here we see p tags. These are for paragraphs. So you can just type some text wherever you want. I can just blah, 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 blah. That's all going to show up on the screen. It's not going to have any structure to it though, and I'm not going to be able to format that because there's not going to be any way to identify that in my CSS. So that's why we frequently will use some p tags for paragraph. That's a great one. There's buttons. That's kind of getting you into forms. So forms are another great part of HTML. Forms give us the ability to create input, to actually have inputs that the user is communicating to our application or our website with. Rather than just clicking a link, they can actually interact with it. Links are super basic. They're really just going to go to another page. I still remember one of my first websites before I really learned how to do everything. It was a horror movie website, and everything was links. Literally all of the motion throughout the site was links, and that was one of the heaviest sites I've ever made. Like, I don't recommend it. It's a lot of typing. It's unnecessary. Let the program, the languages, the markup language, all do the work for you, so you don't have to work so hard. Through here, you're seeing some different parts of the forms. We'll get more into that later. There's labels for the inputs. That just binds them together. That'll help with the screen reader, and also it can, in some cases, actually make a nice little label for you. Further down, let's see if there's anything else we can see. Here, a script. Cool. So scripts are how we connect programming languages and programs to our HTML so that we can make them do some stuff. Like right here, it's some jQuery. Yeah, it looks like this is actually the jQuery library itself, so that I was able to use jQuery later on in my JavaScript, rather than having to do straight vanilla JavaScript. But it's implemented in use, so it needs to be here. Whenever you see script, it means you're probably doing some programming stuff. Down here you can see the script where I'm connecting my JavaScript, my actual JavaScript document. And then at the end we're closing the body and we're closing that HTML. So those opening and closing tags are kind of sandwiching things, and you'll get used to boilerplate, but a little just kind of sneak peek. CSS is going to be attached. That's that file we had attached. So this is why it's so important to use that HTML, to actually use those tags for your elements, because all of these are little selectors. I'm actually selecting that particular element, and I'm adding in what it should look like. I'm adding in some visible visual properties. So some of these are classes. There's probably an ID or two listed in there. Again, we'll get into that more later. You can see an image tag. My images are all going to follow this format as far as how they look. So this is making it so that all of my images follow this. That way I'm not having to constantly program on every single one what I think they should look like. That's super tedious. So you can see how I can get some pretty complex look to my page, this application, with very little work, because so many of these things are being repeated. Last, there's JavaScript. That's where we're getting more functionality. You can see here the JavaScript is a little bit longer, but a lot of that's just repetition, copying, pasting and stuff. Got some questions and answers and all that. Down here you're going to see a function. Functions are kind of our building blocks, our basic building blocks of JavaScript. That's why I say that you really are getting some extra functionality out of JavaScript, even if you can create some action, some motion, and whatnot within your HTML or potentially your CSS. It's not really the same. Like, this is going to create a whole host of other stuff. Like, I'm actually able to run the entire application on a single page. None of this is linking anywhere else. It's just a combination of showing and hiding things at the proper time, getting some values pulled in. This is working on our inputs that we saw before. A little more of that. Like, there's really a lot more that you can do. And again, don't worry, don't get overwhelmed. None of this is really too crazy. It's just so that you can see a little bit of code and know kind of what you're looking at. More and more of this is just going to come to you. When you see a certain thing like a function or a paragraph or section, you're just automatically going to know what it is. So that's my introduction. We're going to go a little more into what the different elements are and the next couple sections, a little more of a deep dive, see what we're looking at. We'll go into divs versus spans, also what sections are. We've got lists coming up, images, do some iframes so you can play with some YouTube videos, embedding them, then tables. So just so you kind of know where we're going. We've got a lot coming up, but we're going to keep it, like I said, bite size. And as always, please subscribe. I really appreciate it, just so that I can keep content coming. Well, I hope you have a great day, and I will see you soon.